Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the fourth of our special National Payroll Week webinars. This one's all about Parental Leave Essentials and understanding statutory parental payments. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter for this session, and I am joined by my colleagues Alice and Paul, who are both standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer any of your questions. So moving on to today's session, let's take a look at what we're going to cover. So the webinars this week are a little bit different to our normal webinars. They're not product-based as such. We are focusing on more of the fundamentals of payroll, and the specific topic today is around parental payments. So I'm going to introduce the webinar, and then we're going to take a look first at maternity and adoption pay. So this will include things like the qualifying conditions, the entitlements, and the process for employees requesting this type of leave. We are then going to move on to paternity leave and pay, which is the parental pay for partners of mothers or adopters. And we're going to finish by talking about shared parental leave and pay, which gives a more flexible option for a couple so that both parents can share the time off and pay when looking after a child. And we'll just finish off with the process for reclaiming the statutory parental payments from HMRC. So that's what we've got lined up for you. Let's get on with our introduction. So the birth or adoption of a child is a very special time for new parents, and in order to support this major life event, employers will provide time off work, and it's usually paid time off, and the paid time off is mostly funded by the government in terms of the statutory payments that we're going to focus on today. Now, during the webinar today, we will be following the journey of our fictitious employees, Amelia and Oliver, as they welcome their new baby into the world, and we're going to see how their employer deals with this as and when it comes to processing their payments through payroll. So as we go through this, we are going to focus particularly on the statutory parental payments, but we'll also touch on things like contractual pay and keep in touch days. And we'll be following this journey from start to finish as they move through these various different parental payments. Now, just as a side, the image on the slide there is something that was created by AI. So this is our new parents. Not quite sure how realistic that is. They're looking pretty good for someone that's just given birth. But these are the guys, Amelia and Oliver, that we're going to be following today. So we are going to start off with our employee, Amelia. Amelia was expecting a baby back in April 2024. And as we go through this process, I'm also going to cover adoption, as the process is pretty similar. So I'll try and mention some of the things that are slightly different when it comes to dealing with statutory adoption leave and adoption pay. But starting on Amelia's maternity leave, this is something that's known as a day one right, which means that the employee would qualify for maternity leave as long as they have an employment contract with you. And it doesn't matter how long they've worked for you in order to qualify for the leave, and they give you the correct notice, which is generally 15 weeks before the due date. And the entitlement to statutory maternity leave is 52 weeks. And technically that's made up of 26 weeks of ordinary leave and 26 weeks of additional maternity leave. Now, the employee doesn't have to take that full year off of work, but they must take at least 2 weeks leave after the baby is born, or at least 4 weeks leave if they are a factory worker. So that's the leave. Pretty much everyone gets that one. That's your day one right. But let's take a look at whether Amelia might qualify for statutory maternity pay. Now, statutory maternity pay, or SMP for short, is paid to employees who meet the qualifying conditions, and this is the payment that is mostly funded by the government. The way that it works is that the employer pays the amount to the employee at the same time as they would have paid their usual wages, and then the employer reclaims the statutory payment when it comes to paying over their tax and national insurance at the end of each month, and they would offset the amount that they're reclaiming against the tax and the national insurance that was due to be paid. Now, if for some reason the tax and NI doesn't cover the amount of statutory payment reclaimed, you can, as an employer, apply for advance funding for the statutory payments, and you can get that money paid to you by HMRC. Now, most employers are reclaiming 92% of the statutory parental pay. That's the standard reclaim amount. But if you're an employer who qualifies for small employers relief, you actually reclaim 103% of the statutory parental payment. And you would usually qualify for small employers relief if your total national insurance contributions for the tax year before the qualifying or matching week is £45,000 or less. So a good way to check that is to have a look at maybe your P32 report for the previous tax year, run it for the full year, and then you'll see your gross national insurance, that's your total class 1 national insurance figure on that report. So let's take a look at the qualifying conditions for statutory maternity pay. So they must meet these conditions in order to qualify for the payment, and they are that they must be on your payroll in the qualifying week. And qualifying week's going to come up quite a lot in today's session. It's actually the 15th week before the expected date of childbirth. They need to give you the correct notice. So that's usually 15 weeks before the due date and 28 days for the date that they want to start their leave. They need to provide proof that they're pregnant in the case of maternity, which is a MAP B1 certificate. Now, when it comes to adoption, the evidence would be a matching certificate. And they need to have been continuously employed by you for at least 26 weeks up to any day in the qualifying week. So 26 weeks up to that 15th week before the due date. They'll also need sufficient earnings. So their average pay in the 8-week relevant period needs to be at least £123 per week to qualify for this payment. And you can read more about the qualifying conditions by following the link there to the gov.uk website. We've got an image there on the slide, just a sample of a MAP B1 form, which your employee would get usually from the midwife, sometimes from the doctor. So let's try and put some of these dates on a timeline, and we are going to link them back to Amelia in just a moment. So we are counting back from the baby's due date or expected week of confinement, EWC. And when we count back 15 weeks, we get to the qualifying week. And then remember, to qualify for this payment, the employee must have been employed at least 26 weeks before that qualifying week. So that is the latest start date for them to qualify for the payment. The 8-week period leading up to the qualifying week is where the average weekly earnings are calculated. And this determines whether they qualify for the payment. So they must be above £123 per week. And it will also be used to calculate the higher rate of maternity pay, which I will come on to in just a moment. The earliest date that an employee can leave to start their maternity leave is 11 weeks before the due date, with the one exception being if the baby is born before that time, in which case the leave will start the day after the baby is born. And if an employee happens to be off work with a pregnancy-related sickness, and they get to 4 weeks before the due date and haven't yet started their maternity leave, that's the point that they would have to transfer to statutory maternity pay if they were previously on sick pay. So that's some of the key dates laid out on a timeline. Looking back at Amelia's baby was due on the 26th of April of 2024. So that was her due date, and that was on the MAP B1 certificate. That means that her qualifying week was the 7th of January 2024. So we'll be looking at the earnings in the 8-week period before that date in order to work out her higher rate of maternity pay. That also happens to be the date that she should have given notice by as well. And then the latest start date to qualify for this payment is 22nd of July 2023. And actually, in this case, she was employed several years up to that date as well. So she's met the qualifying conditions, and these are the dates applicable to this case of maternity leave. Now, when it comes to adoption, remember the qualifying week you can generally substitute for matching week. and they are able to start the leave in the days leading up to the placement date. But you can find more information on adoption pay by following the links either in our help centre if you use Sage Payroll or from the gov.uk website. So how much will the employee get paid in terms of the statutory maternity pay? Well, as I alluded to, it's at two different rates. For the first 6 weeks of SMP, it is paid at the higher rate, and that rate is 90% of the employee's average weekly earnings, calculated up to the qualifying week. And then for the remainder of the entitlement, because they get up to 39 weeks in total, 33 weeks is paid at the standard rate. Now that is either £184.03 per week for the current tax year, or 90% of average weekly earnings if that's lower. So some employees, perhaps they're part-time, their earnings aren't as high, might get the same rate for all 39 weeks. It might just be 90% of average earnings. But for most employees, they get that higher rate, which is 90% of average, and then it drops down to a standard rate, £184.03 per week, and that will usually increase more often than not at the start of each tax year. Now, we have included a link there on the slide to the gov.uk maternity pay calculator, but the good news is if you use payroll software such as Sage 50 Payroll or Sage Payroll, entering the maternity dates is all you should need to do in order to automatically calculate the payment. So what are the next steps for the employer? So once they've received that notice, they can start to enter the maternity details, and they would probably do this when they're approaching the employee's start of maternity leave. So they would enter things like the due date, the employee's last day that they're due to be at work, and then the payroll software would ensure that the average earnings are high enough, and it will do a calculation of those average earnings. And then it'll calculate the maternity pay entitlement, SMP, based on those dates of leave, the pay date, so it is paid up to your employee's pay date, and then the average earnings in the relevant period, determining that 90% amount. So I know that many of you will be using Sage 50 Payroll. So I've popped Amelia's dates into the quick SMP screen just there, and you can see it has calculated that entitlement. So Amelia's getting her 6 weeks at the higher rate, 90% of her average, dropping down to 33 weeks at the standard rate, 184.03. So that's how it's going to work for Amelia. Let's now move on to our other employee, Oliver. He's actually Amelia's partner, and he's the baby's father. So he may be entitled to some statutory paternity leave and statutory paternity pay. So let's have a look at who would get this payment. Now, unlike the maternity leave, statutory parental leave isn't a day one right. So to get the leave at all, as a statutory right, the employee would need to qualify. Now, first of all, the employee must be either the father of the child, the husband or partner of the mother or adopter, the child's adopter, or the intended parent if they're having a baby through surrogacy arrangements. And they'll complete a declaration declaring that they are one of their roles. There are other qualifying conditions as well. So to be eligible for the leave and the pay, they do need to have been continuously employed for 26 weeks up to and including the qualifying week, and still be employed at the date that the child is born or placed with the adopter. They need to be earning at least £123 per week in the 8-week relevant period. So this might be sounding familiar. They need to give you the correct notice. So again, that notice period is 15 weeks before the baby is due to inform you that they're going to be taking the leave and pay, and 28 days notice of the date they want to start their leave. They need to be taking the time off to look after the child or their partner and be responsible for the child's upbringing. And again, we have linked to the official page with the eligibility criteria there on gov.uk. Now, for paternity pay in England, Wales and Scotland, there have been some recent changes to legislation. So just in case you're not aware, just want to let you know what's changed. So these changes do apply to babies that were expected after the 6th of April 2024 or adopted on or after the 6th of April. And the change is that the paternity leave and pay can now be taken within the first 52 weeks following the birth or placement, where previously it had to be taken within 56 days. It's also been made more flexible, so the leave can be taken as either a single block of 1 or 2 weeks, so it could be taken continuously, or can now be taken as 2 separate blocks of 1 week of leave. Employees will need to give 28 days notice of the date they want to start their leave, so they won't necessarily have to tell you straight away when they want to take that leave, particularly if it's going to be towards the end of that 52-week period. But do please note that that change doesn't apply in Northern Ireland, where the previous rules remain in force. So in Northern Ireland, it's 56 days that they need to use up the paternity leave and pay. So let's look at the key dates then for paternity. So again, we're going to base this on the due date, also known as expected week of confinement. Counting back 15 weeks takes us to the qualifying week, and then counting back another 26 weeks is the earliest start date to qualify for the payment. Average earnings is calculated in the same way as it is for maternity, but this is more an exercise of checking that they qualify for the payment, so it needs to be above £123, as the rate of pay for paternity is the standard rate, 183 and £184.03 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings if that's lower. Now, earliest date that the leave can begin is at the date the baby is born. So they can't take statutory paternity leave or receive the pay for dates before the date of birth. And with the exception of Northern Ireland, the date the leave must finish by is 15 weeks from the baby's birthday. So that they need to have taken it by the baby's first birthday. Now, just to sort of relate this to adoption, if you're the partner of someone who is adopting, you are entitled usually to statutory paternity pay adoption. The qualifying week would be replaced with matching week again in terms of adoption, and the date the baby is born can be substituted with the date of placement of the baby. But the other rules remain pretty much the same. Now, if an employee, well, let's just link this back to Oliver. So it's actually the same dates as Amelia. The due date of their baby is the 26th of April, which means the qualifying week was the 7th of January. Latest start date was the 22nd of July. So as long as he was employed on that date, which he was, I think he started back in 2019 in my example, he is going to be qualifying for this payment, assuming his average weekly earnings are high enough. So rate of pay for paternity is the standard rate, £184.03 for the current tax year, or 90% of average weekly earnings, whichever is lower. And again, it's a case of entering the paternity details into your payroll software. For those of you that use Sage 50 payroll, you could use the quick SPP option to do this. And Oliver has decided that he's going to take his paternity leave starting on the 29th of April. He's going to take the 2 weeks consecutively. So he's going to take a full 2 weeks at that point. And you can see that the statutory payment is calculated in this case as 2 weeks at the standard rate, because that is the lower figure between that and 90% of average earnings. So that's how it's working for the statutory maternity and paternity pay. But I did want to give a brief mention to contractual payments. So employees may be entitled to receive some company maternity or paternity pay in addition to the statutory payment, and the details of such arrangements are usually included in the contract of employment, which is why it's sometimes called contractual maternity pay. The way that these types of payments would work is that the employer would still process the statutory element of the payment and reclaim that in the usual way. So you'd still process the SMP or SPP, because you need to be able to reclaim it and submit that to HMRC. But then they would top up that payment with the company pay so that the employee is receiving what they're entitled to as per their contract. Now, the way that you process that is really up to you. It might be processed as a separate payment line. So you might work out how much in each period of company maternity or paternity pay you want to pay them, and that will be paid in addition to the statutory payment. Or your software like Sage 50 Payroll may have a make-up basic option. So that allows you to put a total amount in on a payment line and then use make-up basic to automatically adjust that down by the statutory pay amount. It's important to understand that company parental payments are fully funded by the employer. So those extra payments cannot be reclaimed from HMRC. You just get 92% of the statutory amount, or if you're a small employer, qualifying for small employers relief, you get that 103%. So that's a note on contractual pay. Sometimes it's limited for a time scale, so you would need to work out really period by period how much you need to give them and then manually enter or make up to basic for those periods. Now, other thing to mention is during these periods of maternity or adoption leave, so the one that lasts up to 39 weeks of paid leave or 52 weeks in total, employees are allowed to take up to 10 keeping in touch days. So they are kit days, they're known as, without that ending their leave or affecting their statutory pay. So keep in touch days came in a number of years ago now, because previously, before they existed, if you did any work during your maternity or paternity leave under the rules, you would lose that whole week's statutory pay for a week that you worked in. So keep in touch days have been designed to allow employees to stay in contact with their employer, maybe to complete some training. And there's kind of 4 principles that I just want to run through to do with those kit days. So first of all, they do need to be agreed between the employee and employer. So there's no automatic right to them. They would agree whether they're going to take them, when they're going to take them, and that's all agreed in advance. Employees need to be paid for the time that they're actually at work doing these kit days. So typically they would be paid kind of their normal daily rate or hourly rates for the hours that they've worked on a kit day. So that could be entered again as a separate payment line on your payroll in addition to the statutory payment. And it's worth mentioning that for the time that they're working, they do need to be paid at least national minimum wage. So that again is something to factor in when you're putting in their payment. Any day that they do a kit day, so even if it's for half an hour, just an hour, that counts as a full kit day. So under the legislation, they're allowed up to 10 during the period of maternity or adoption leave. But if they do go on to shared parental leave, which is something I'm going to talk about next, they do get an additional 20 shared parental keep in touch days, which is something that might benefit your employees if they are going to be sort of coming into the office a bit more during their official kind of parental time off. So that's contractual pay and kit days. And as promised, we're now going to move on to shared parental leave and pay. So returning to Amelia and Oliver's journey, they've now welcomed their baby into the world. They've had some of their maternity and Oliver's had all of his paternity leave. But now they're kind of looking for a little more flexibility when it comes to caring for their new baby. So this is exactly where shared parental leave and pay could come in. So to give you a bit of background on this, what is shared parental leave and pay? So it can be abbreviated to SPL and SHPP. Shared parental leave can be up to 50 weeks. It's usually less than that, and I'll explain why in a moment. And shared parental pay is the statutory payment that can be paid for up to 37 weeks. Now, it enables the mother or the main adopter to effectively end their maternity or adoption leave early, and then whatever entitlements are remaining from that leave can then be shared with their partner. Now, the mother must take at least 2 weeks maternity leave from the date the baby's born, or 2 weeks of adoption leave. And that's why theoretically the maximum is 50 weeks. But if they've started their maternity leave before the baby's born, which I would say most mothers do, they still have to do those 2 weeks as maternity before they could switch over to shared parental. So those are your maximum entitlements, but how would an employee kind of apply for this? Well, a few things need to happen. So the mother or main adopter needs to end their maternity or adoption leave and return to work, or give you binding notice. So it's a decision that can't normally be changed of the date when their maternity or adoption leave will end. They do need to provide 8 weeks written notice to their employer of their entitlement to the shared parental leave and pay, and they must tell you how they intend to share their leave and pay. Now, this notice can be given on a form that they can get from ACAS, or you may have created your own equivalent forms. Just to show you what that form looks like, it's one of the more complicated forms, but I've downloaded a copy, which I'll just bring up on screen here. So 4 forms in total. You'd need to look at the scenario, whether both parents are taking it, just the mother or birth parent wants to take it, or just the partner wants to take it, and then you would go ahead, or the employee would go ahead and complete the information on the form. So it's essentially given details of when the maternity or adoption leave was taken, what will be remaining in the entitlement to both leave and pay. And then there's a form for the partner, if the partner will be taking some, to say that they're intending to take it, and what dates of leave they're going to use. So I'm not going to go through this form, but it's quite a complicated one. It's actually something I did for one of my children, so I'm a bit familiar with the process, but that's how they would apply for it. Now, to be eligible for the payment, the shared parental pay, one of the following must apply. So if they were eligible for the original statutory payment, maternity or adoption pay, that automatically makes them eligible for shared parental pay. Or if they were eligible for paternity pay and their partner was eligible for SMP, maternity allowance, or SAP, that would make the partner qualify for the shared parental pay. This one is paid at the standard rate, so all of it £184.03 per week, or of course 90% of average weekly earnings, whichever is lower. Now, where the flexibility comes in is around the dates of leave. So once the parents have decided they're going to end the maternity or adoption leave early and share what's remaining, they are entitled, there's a statutory entitlement to up to 3 separate blocks of leave. And you can, as an employer, allow them to have more than 3 separate blocks, but that's kind of their statutory entitlement. That leave could be taken at different times between the parents, could be taken at the same time as the other parent, or it might just be one of the parents that decides to use it all. But they have the flexibility of breaking it up into blocks, whereas maternity or adoption pay is paid continuously for the 39 weeks. So some examples of how shared parental pay could be shared out. So on the slide here, we've got a mother or adopter who maybe planned originally to take the full entitlement of maternity or adoption pay, which is the 39 weeks, and the partner just taking the 2 weeks of paternity pay, which they've decided to do when the baby was born. But as long as they give the right notice and inform their employer, what they could choose to do is to end the maternity pay early, and then maybe the partner is going to take over and deal with the childcare for the rest of the entitlement. Other ways they could do it is they could both be off at the same time. So maybe the mother's not going to return to work. They're actually just going to switch straight onto the shared parental leave and receive shared parental pay. And it means that their partner could do that at the same time. So it could have a period there where they're both off, and then maybe the partner's going to stay on and take the remainder of the entitlement. Or here's an example where they split it into blocks. So we've got some time where they're both off together, and then we've got blocks of leave that are being used where they're off at different times. Now, thinking back to our employees, Amelia and Oliver, they've decided to go with this option. So Amelia is going to be officially ending her maternity leave early. She's given the right notice, they've filled in all the forms. That takes them up to around summertime. So they've decided to have 6 weeks off each at summer at the same time, which is all going to be paid as part of the shared parental pay entitlement. And then they have until the baby's first birthday to use up the rest of the pay and leave should they wish to. So they've planned in some blocks of leave later on in the year where they're going to take some time off at separate times to each other. So what they will have done is they'll have filled in the form, given that to their employer. The employer would record the details, the dates of leave, and they would use their payroll software to pay the statutory payment, and that will all be reclaimed in the same way as maternity or paternity. So that's a nice segue into the last part of the webinar, where I'm going to touch on reclaiming statutory payments. So as a reminder, statutory parental payments are mostly funded by the government, as most employers can reclaim 92% of the statutory parental pay they've paid out. It is worth noticing that this is only parental payments. Statutory sick pay cannot be reclaimed from the government. SSP is fully paid by the employer. And remember, those who qualify for small employers relief do get the 103% of the statutory payment back. You qualify for the SER if your total national insurance was less than £45,000 in the tax year before the qualifying or matching week. And the amount that you're reclaiming can be offset against your PAYE liabilities. So that's your tax, your national insurance, and student loans. So just to show you an example, as many of you will be using Sage 50 payroll, at the end of each month, you would run a P32 report. So this shows you tax, national insurance, and student loans that you're paying over, but it also calculates amounts that you're recovering. So in this example here, we've got some maternity and paternity pay being recovered, and that NIC compensation, if due, is for small employers, the ones that have small employers relief. So that's the 3% extra, so 103% altogether is what they reclaim. That then reduces the amount that needs to be paid over at the end of the month, but it does need to be reported to HMRC as part of an EPS submission. And that's something you should be familiar with if you joined Alice this morning at our Keeping It RTI webinar. So an employer payment summary, it's done at the end of the month when you need to do a reclaim, and it reports the amounts that have been reclaimed for the tax year to date. So that's what the employer is doing. They're paying the statutory payment, they're reclaiming it back at the end of the month, and that has nearly brought us to the end of the webinar. But just to recap, Amelia and Oliver's journey. So we've seen that Amelia took her maternity leave just a couple of weeks before the due date, starting on the 8th of April. The baby was born shortly after that, and that is when Oliver took his paternity leave. So he took the 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave and was paid statutory paternity pay. But they did realise quite early on that they could switch to shared parental leave if they wanted to. So they gave the notice, and then just in time for the summer holidays, from the 22nd of July, they switched to shared parental leave. They had their 6 weeks in summer together with the baby, and they've got some remaining entitlement that they need to take by the baby's first birthday. So that brings us to the end of that presentation, and all that remains really is to run through some of the further support that's available to you guys, particularly if you are a Sage payroll user. So in terms of webinars, this was session 4 out of 5 of our National Payroll Week webinars. If you've attended at least one of our previous sessions and you come along to the quiz tomorrow, that will get you up to 3, which qualifies you for our digital badge. They'll be sent out by the end of the month. And if you are free tomorrow morning and you can join us at the quiz, you may win yourself that fantastic hamper. So do get yourself signed up if you want to join us. Just a bit of fun, testing your knowledge on some of the things that you may have learned this week at our webinars. For Sage users, we do have an online help centre available to you 24/7, which you can access at sage.co.uk/help. Follow the link for the software you need help with, Sage 50 Payroll or perhaps Sage Payroll. And then from there, you can find support guides. We have webinars available, further webinars in September. So if you want to know more about statutory parental payments, we do have some dedicated sessions on processing those in Sage 50 Payroll. If you need to get in touch with our support team, you can find all of their contact details as well in our online help centre. We also have learning available via Sage University at sageu.com. From there, you can log in and access our e-learning courses. We have certification and bite-sized learning, and these courses covers things from payroll fundamentals right through to the statutory payments that we've been talking about today. While we have you here, as well as payroll solutions, I'd like to tell you that we do offer other people solutions such as Sage HR and Sage HR Advice. Speaking specifically about Sage HR, this is something that enables you to automate and simplify your HR tasks, ensuring you manage your employees fairly and consistently, supporting productivity, well-being, and job satisfaction within your workforce. It really is kind of the future of HR, dealing with things digitally, giving your employees access to a mobile app. So with that said, we've got about 5 minutes left in the session. I'm sure there's been a few questions coming through, so we are going to do a quick check on how those questions are going. I'm going to go on to mute shortly just to help out with any remaining questions. Remember, if you want to keep them, the questions and answers, you will need to copy and paste them into another document. We still have the handout available, so a wealth of information on those slides. If you'd like the handout, do feel free to download it. Once the webinar has ended, you will be invited to take a survey. So we'd love to know what you've thought of the webinars, if you've been to any others this week, by completing the webinar survey. We do read all of your feedback, really appreciate your thoughts, and it helps us to keep these webinars as best as they can be. And we will send you a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's session. So anything you might have missed that you'd like to review or share with colleagues, you can find that in the follow-up email. So I am going to go on to mute just for a few moments, and I will be back when we are ready to close this session down. So I'll speak to you shortly. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for sending those questions through. As we are now pretty much out of time, we are going to call it a day there. But I hope you enjoyed the session today, and I hope you've enjoyed the other National Payroll Week webinars, if you've been to any. Love to see you at the quiz tomorrow, if you're free. So we look forward to that one, and we have further webinars, of course, scheduled in for the rest of September. So do check them out if you are one of our Sage 50 Payroll customers. But with that said, on behalf of myself, Alice, and the team here at Sage, thank you once again for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe we'll see you on one of our other webinars in the near future. But it's goodbye for now.